Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Russell Barkley. I'm a clinical professor of psychiatry at the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston, South Carolina. Welcome to this internet course for parents. This is part 3. It will address the treatments for ADHD in children and adolescents, and it will give a special emphasis to the medications for ADHD. That is because there are 2 other courses for parents on this website that go into more detail on the school management of ADHD using various educational and behavioral interventions, and also a separate course on 18 principles for the home management of ADHD in children and adolescents. But this course will certainly highlight all of the treatments for ADHD that are available. In my opinion, there are at least 5 components or stages to the effective management of ADHD in children and teens. The first of these is to make sure that the child has received an appropriate evaluation and that all of the disorders that may be present have been identified. As I taught in my other courses on this website, children with ADHD often have at least one other disorder, and more than half of them have at least 2 other disorders. All of these disorders need to be properly diagnosed and identified so that appropriate treatment can be provided to the child. The second component of treatment is to make sure that parents are well educated about the nature of ADHD and its management. You can do that by taking the courses on this website for parents. The third component involves the use of medications for ADHD. In my opinion, between 70 and 80% of children and adolescents with ADHD will require medication at least some point during their childhood or adolescent years in order to effectively manage their disorder. In my opinion, only the most mild cases of ADHD are able to get by without needing medication to address their difficulties. Most children with ADHD will benefit from the use of various behavior modification methods that can be used to improve the child's behavior. Typically, these begin by training parents in using different parenting tactics and strategies so as to change the parent's behavior, and then that change leads to changes in the child's behavior. I'll have more to say about this shortly. Finally, ADHD is also dealt with by ensuring that there are appropriate environmental accommodations that help to compensate for the disorder. This may involve restructuring the home life, or especially restructuring situations in which the child has to perform, such as homework, chores, or other activities. Restructuring the school, for instance, so that the child has appropriate accommodations in the classroom. This may involve changing the curriculum, where the child sits in school, the arrangement of their desk, and so forth. And finally, some children need assistance in the community by making accommodations in various situations that they may encounter, such as changing the way they are dealt with in church, for instance, or changing the way they are dealt with on the playground or in various sports activities and community organizations. So I believe that all 5 of these components need to be present in order to have the most complete, the most comprehensive, and the most effective treatment package for dealing with a child or adolescent's ADHD. Now I want to begin by just highlighting the science-based or empirically proven treatments that are available for children and teens with ADHD. There are many of them. The most important step in treatment, as I've indicated, is to be sure that the parents have been appropriately educated about the nature, causes, course, risks, and treatments for ADHD. You can start toward that step by taking the courses on this website. Second, as I mentioned, medications have been well tested for ADHD and have ample scientific evidence for their effectiveness. Most children with ADHD will require one of the medications available in order to help address their ADHD and reduce their impairments. There are 3 kinds of medications on the market for ADHD that I will discuss here and that have received approval by the Food and Drug Administration. They are the stimulants, the noradrenergic medication known as Strattera or atomoxetine, and the new antihypertensive drug approved for ADHD known as Intuniv, and goes under the drug name of guanfacine XR. Parents can also benefit from receiving specific training in child behavior management skills to use in dealing with the ADHD child's symptoms at home and in the community across the day. By age 12 to 14, we believe it's also beneficial to begin to work with the teenager with ADHD, as well as with their parents, using a family therapy program known as problem solving and communication training. I'll have more to say about both of these programs, the child management program and the problem solving program, later in this presentation. Finally, research has shown that ADHD children do benefit from routine, regular aerobic exercise. This does not eliminate their disorder, but appears to result in some reduction in their symptoms, as well as in the ability to cope with their symptoms in various situations. Also, ADHD children have been shown to be prone to being overweight or obese, perhaps because of their impulsiveness and coupled with the availability of snack or junk foods. Nevertheless, recent studies have shown that children with ADHD tend to be somewhat overweight, and so incorporating routine, regular exercise into their daily life activities can help to address that problem as well. Besides those treatments, there are also treatments that can be implemented in school. The first of these is to make sure that teachers are well educated about the nature of ADHD. Just like parents, teachers need to know the exact nature of the disorder, its causes, its life course and risks, as well as the available effective treatments for managing the disorder. Teachers also need to receive extra training in classroom behavior management methods, similar to the behavior modification techniques that can be taught to that can be taught to parents. Now, if you wish to learn more about these classroom behavior management methods, please take my course for parents on this website dealing with the school management of ADHD. There you will find at least 80 recommendations for how to deal with school-based problems that the ADHD child may be having. Children with ADHD are also eligible in the United States for special formal educational services under two different federal laws: the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, known as IDEA, and Section 504 of the Disability Rights Act. So parents need to be sure that their child is evaluated under both of these federal laws to determine if the child is eligible to receive any extra services in school or any additional accommodations for dealing with their ADHD. A few children may need to attend residential psychiatric hospitals or residential schools for ADHD. As you can see here, in my experience, this is only about 5 to 8% of children who need to go away from home in order to receive appropriate and intensive treatment for their ADHD. Usually these children have several other disorders that may require this type of inpatient or residential treatment. But the vast majority of ADHD children can be handled within regular school environments. Now, ADHD, as you may have learned from the other courses on this website, is a highly genetic disorder. It runs in families, which means that the parents of ADHD children are also likely to have the same disorder themselves. Research shows that the parent's disorder can interfere with the parenting of a child with ADHD. It can also interfere with efforts to introduce treatment programs for the ADHD child. And so it's appropriate and important that parents with ADHD be appropriately diagnosed and treated for their disorder in order that it does not interfere with child rearing or with the delivery of services for the child with ADHD. In my experience, at least 1 in 4 to perhaps 1 in 3 parents of ADHD children will need treatment services for their own disorder or related disorders to their ADHD. Finally, I also recommend that parents join various support groups for ADHD. One of the largest organizations that provides parent support groups in the United States is the CHADD organization for children and adults with ADD. You can go to their website, which is chadd.org, to learn more about this organization and to see whether or not there might be a chapter near to your community. There is also another organization known as the Attention Deficit Disorders Association. It can be found at add.org. This organization tends to focus more on adults with ADHD, but you might find some information on their website to be useful. Finally, around the United States, and certainly in other countries in the world, there are independent parent support organizations that provide very similar programs, such as monthly meetings for parents of ADHD children. Now let me briefly discuss some of the unproven or disproven therapies that have been used for the management of ADHD. In my opinion, these therapies should be avoided. The first of these has been the belief that diet is a major cause of ADHD, and therefore eliminating substances from the diet can be beneficial for children with ADHD. One idea was that sugar increases ADHD symptoms, or indeed causes ADHD. Researchers have thoroughly studied this idea and have found that it has no credibility. Sugar does not appear to contribute to the causes of ADHD, and therefore removing sugar from the diet would not benefit children with ADHD. That does not mean that cutting down sugar in the diet would not be a healthy thing to do for a child with ADHD, particularly if they are prone to obesity, but don't expect to result in any significant improvement in the child's ADHD symptoms. More recently, people have believed that additives in foods such as flavorings, colorings, and preservatives may produce allergic reactions in children, and these allergic reactions show up as ADHD symptoms. There is very little evidence for this idea as a cause of ADHD. Nevertheless, elimination diets are rather popular. People often try to remove these substances from a child's diet in hopes that it will improve their child's ADHD symptoms. Researchers have thoroughly studied this idea as well. Research has found that about 5% of ADHD children may well have some allergic reactions to these additives or flavorings or colorings in the diet, and that these allergic reactions can result in some irritation or worsening of ADHD symptoms. But this occurs in only about 1 out of 20 ADHD children, and primarily this is limited to the preschool years, so that 95% of ADHD children do not really appear to be benefited from these elimination diets. Now, most recently in the news, there was a study that took place in Holland that claimed that these kinds of elimination diets were beneficial for ADHD children. But closer inspection of that study showed that it had several flaws in its methods that could account for these findings. For instance, parents were not blind to what type of diet the child was receiving. By blind, I mean that parents knew exactly when the children were receiving the additives in the diet or when they had been removed. We know that if parents know when a treatment is being delivered, they're likely to bias their reports of improvement of ADHD symptoms. And so this could just be another example of what we often call a placebo effect or an expectancy effect. So at the moment, it appears that there is very little evidence for support of manipulating the diets of ADHD children in order to deal with their ADHD symptoms. Another popular approach in the United States has been to add in substances to the diet, such as extra doses of vitamins or larger doses of vitamins, in the belief that this would improve ADHD symptoms. Also, there has been the belief that adding antioxidant chemicals into the diet, such as pycnogenol, which is an extract of pine tree bark, might benefit ADHD children. Most recently, people have felt that fish oils, particularly those containing omega-3 acids, may benefit ADHD children. Research has shown that less than 1 in 4 ADHD children benefits from the addition of fish oils into their diet, and these children principally have the inattentive type of ADHD, also called sluggish cognitive tempo. You can learn more about SCT in Part 1 of my lectures for parents on the nature of ADHD. Nevertheless, the vast majority of children with ADHD did not show improvement from taking these fish oils. Finally, some people believe that adding in trace elements or minerals into a child's diet might benefit their ADHD. There is absolutely no proof for this idea. Now, some occupational therapists believe that ADHD can arise because the brain has not developed properly, and the sensory system of the brain is not well integrated with the motor system of the brain. These therapists believe that if children undergo a series of exercises designed to help reintegrate these two parts of the brain, it can result in improvement in their ADHD symptoms. First, there is absolutely no evidence for this theory as causing ADHD in children. And there have been studies that have tested the use of these sensory integration exercises for children with ADHD, and those studies did not find any benefit from this treatment program. Nevertheless, this is a very popular treatment available in most public schools and through most occupational therapists, even though there is no scientific evidence that it benefits such children. Many metropolitan areas in the United States have chiropractors that may offer treatment programs for dealing with children with ADHD or with learning disabilities. These programs often involve manipulating the skull and putting pressure on various points on the head in the belief that this results in an improvement in neurological functioning in the brains of ADHD children. Once again, there is no scientific evidence supporting this theory of ADHD or this approach to management of ADHD. Research has tested the idea that play therapy or psychotherapy might improve ADHD symptoms, but the results of those studies were very disappointing. They showed that these treatments were no better than placebos in improving ADHD children's symptoms, so I do not recommend that children receive play therapy or psychotherapy for their ADHD, even if these treatments may be beneficial for other disorders. There is a treatment program widely available in the United States that is often called EEG biofeedback or neurofeedback. I believe that this is an experimental treatment because the evidence so far has not been unequivocal in supporting the use of this treatment. Certainly there are some studies in the literature that suggested that EEG biofeedback might benefit children with ADHD, but these studies were very poorly done and did not represent good science. When better studies were done with appropriate scientific controls and measures, the studies did not find improvement in ADHD symptoms, especially when those studies compared the biofeedback treatment to a sham or placebo control in which the children and the parents did not know when the child was receiving the legitimate biofeedback and when the child was receiving the sham biofeedback. Nevertheless, this remains a controversial treatment, with many people claiming that children can benefit from this treatment program, yet other studies have found that there is no improvement from the treatment. So this mixed pattern of results in the scientific studies has led me to list this treatment as an experimental program that is in need of more services before parents should access this program. I believe that parents should try to use other science-based programs first for the management of their child's ADHD, and then, if they wish to, and if they have the extra income available to purchase this treatment, which can often run up to $4,000 to $6,000, then if the parent wishes to try it, probably no harm is done. But I would not recommend this treatment at this time as a major or first line of intervention for ADHD. In the 1980s, people believed that ADHD might benefit from an approach to treatment known as self-control training or cognitive behavior therapy. This is where the child is trained to monitor their own behavior, to talk to themselves as they engage in various tasks, and to reward their own behavior in order to try to improve their ADHD symptoms. Research did not find that these approaches were particularly beneficial for children with ADHD, especially if the services were provided in a clinic. It might be that some of these techniques, particularly if they are used in schools, might be of some modest benefit to ADHD children, but even that is questionable. Many children with ADHD have social skills problems. That is to say that they often have peer relationship difficulties, and parents often seek out social skills programs in order to try to improve their child's social relationships. Studies of social skills training, however, have found that it is not especially beneficial for children with ADHD, particularly if the training is done in the clinic. More positive results have been found if the social skills program is part of the child's school day, that is, where the teacher institutes the social skills program in the classroom environment, using the other children as part of the social skills group. These other children are the kids that ADHD children have to learn to get along with, and therefore the program might be best implemented within the school environment. Even then, the results are not always especially positive. Some studies have shown that the inattentive form of ADHD, known as SCT or sluggish cognitive tempo, might be the best subset of children to provide social skills training for, as they appear to be the most responsive. Also, studies suggest that ADHD children who are more anxious and socially withdrawn may be the most likely to benefit from these social skills interventions. Nevertheless, social skills programs, if provided in a clinic once a week, do not appear to be particularly useful for ADHD children. Now, as I've said, I think that the first step and the most effective step in treatment of ADHD children is to make sure that parents are well educated about the nature of the disorder, its causes, its life course and risks if it is not treated properly, and of course the range of treatments that are available that have some scientific evidence to support their usefulness. So I encourage parents to read widely. There are many good books on ADHD written for parents. You can find them on the major booksellers' websites such as Barnes & Noble or Amazon, or at the addwarehouse.com. One such book is my own that you see here, called Taking Charge of ADHD, The Complete Authoritative Guide for Parents. You can also find lots of information about ADHD on the internet, but please be careful. If you enter ADHD into the Google search engine, you will get several million hits or replies. Unfortunately, most of these are not especially accurate, and some of them are heavily biased. So I encourage you to check out certain websites carefully. Begin with the website helpforadhd.org or chad.org. These websites were created by the National Institute of Mental Health or by the National Charity or Foundation for ADHD Children and Adults, which is chad.org. You can also check out WebMD. I believe they also have pretty good information about ADHD. So I want you to learn as much as you can through reading off the internet, by talking with experts, perhaps attending lectures, and so on, about the nature of ADHD so that you better understand your child's disorder. From this, you will understand that ADHD is a disability, that it is largely due to biological factors, such as neurology and genetics, as you learned in Part 2 of my Internet course here for parents on the causes of ADHD. You also learned that ADHD delays the development not only of attention and inhibition, but also of the brain's executive functions. These executive abilities allow us to regulate our own behavior, which means that ADHD is a disorder of self-regulation. I encourage parents to adopt what I call the 30% rule. If you want to know how delayed your child is in their development of self-control or their executive abilities, on average you can subtract about 30% from their age, and this will give you a rough idea of about where your child's development is in this domain of psychological functioning. So for instance, if you have a 10-year-old child, their executive age is probably that of about a 7-year-old, and therefore you can only expect them to show the extent of self-control that a 7-year-old would be able to show. Keep this in mind as you begin to think about the expectations you have for your child, the kinds of work or tasks that you ask your child to do, and how you expect them to behave in various situations. Remember that they are not like other normal children in their self-control. They're actually like children who are much younger. And if you keep this in mind, you will lower your expectations, and you will make adjustments and accommodations to situations for your child's difficulties with self-control, and therefore you're likely to find that you have a better relationship with your child and less conflict with them around their ADHD. I also encourage parents to accept the fact that ADHD is a neurogenetic disability. And while some ADHD children may outgrow their disorder by adolescence, it's about 10 to 15%, or may outgrow their disorder by adulthood, it's about 15 to 30%. What you see, though, is that the vast majority of ADHD children will retain their disorder into adulthood. And so it's helpful to understand that ADHD is a part of your child. It's who they are. It's actually a part of their personality and the way they approach various situations and tasks. And if you'll come to understand that, I think you will have more compassion for your child and for their disability, and be more willing to make accommodations and adjustments to the child's home and school life in order to more effectively deal with their ADHD. And I think it will also help parents to stop trying to search for the magic cure or the magic bullet for ADHD that can turn their child quickly and automatically into a normal child. There are many treatments available for dealing with ADHD, and they can deal with it effectively, but these treatments do not cure the child of the ADHD. So I think ADHD should be viewed very much like we view diabetes. When a child is diagnosed with diabetes, we don't ask about curing it because we know that it can't be cured. Instead, what we want to know is what are the best ways of dealing with the child's diabetes on a daily basis so that they can lead a relatively normal life and so that we can prevent the development of secondary harms or complications from unmanaged diabetes. I believe precisely the same attitude should be taken toward ADHD by parents. It is a chronic disability that can be effectively managed in order to make the child more effective and successful in their daily life and prevent the development of secondary harms from accruing if the child's ADHD was not properly managed. As I've already indicated, I also encourage parents to make sure that their children are involved regularly in routine aerobic exercise, both to help in dealing with their ADHD symptoms and also reducing the risk for obesity that ADHD seems to produce. Finally, I'd like to encourage parents to increase their monitoring of their child's activities. ADHD children do not have age-appropriate self-control, and therefore they're more likely to get into trouble if they are left alone or to their own devices or unsupervised. So make sure that you are supervising your child more than you would a normal child so that you can head off any difficulties that might be developing should the child be off by themselves. Also, we encourage parents to make children more accountable for their activities, and you can do this by increasing the amount of consequences, rewards, and even mild discipline that your child receives for their appropriate and inappropriate behavior. For more on the kinds of management strategies that parents should use with ADHD children, please take my course on the 18 best principles for home management of the ADHD child on this website. Now, another approach to helping parents deal with ADHD children is to take formal classes in child behavior management skills known as behavior modification. There are many of these programs available. You see one of them here, which is my own. This is my book, Your Defiant Child, 8 Steps to Better Behavior. But there are other books as well that are available at major booksellers or at the addwarehouse.com. It does not seem to be, I think, the particular program that you use, because all of these programs teach very similar skills to parents, and therefore all of them result in very similar degrees of improvement in their child's behavior. Keep in mind that these behavioral parent training programs focus more on reducing parent-child conflict and child oppositional and defiant behavior more than they reduce the child's ADHD symptoms. However, you will see some improvement in the ADHD symptoms from some of these courses. But keep in mind, the courses are really designed to improve your relationship with your child and to reduce the amount of conflict you are having with that child. Also, I like parents to understand that these behavioral parent training programs are most effective when they are instituted with young children. The younger the child, the greater the likelihood that the child will respond to these types of interventions. You see here that children under 11 years of age have a very high likelihood of doing well in these programs. 65 to 75% of them show significant improvement in their behavior and in their relationships with their parents when the parents undergo these training programs and use these skills at home in their daily interactions with their children. But notice that after 12 years of age, by adolescence, that the success rate begins to drop. only about 25 to 30% of teenagers appear to benefit from these behavior management programs. Most likely, this is due to the fact that the influence of parents is declining as a child ages and enters adolescence, while the influence of the peer group and of other adults outside the home is increasing. And therefore, if one wants to address the ADHD adolescence difficulties, one has to also begin to focus on peer groups, schools, and other adults within the community, and not just focus exclusively on using parents as the major source of intervention for the ADHD adolescent. Now, all of these programs tend to focus on a set of common principles. First, they tend to teach parents how to increase the use of positive consequences such as praise, respect, approval, appreciation, as well as the use of privileges, tokens, and other such rewards to increase the child's use of positive behavior, so that whenever a child behaves appropriately or is compliant, parents are encouraged to provide more approval, recognition, and positive rewards and consequences for that child's good behavior. These programs also focus on reducing the use of parents' anger, hostility, aggression, and other high levels of expressed emotion, which are not beneficial for reducing conflict with an ADHD child and only appear to fuel further conflict. These programs instead teach parents how to maintain more appropriate self-control in the face of child misbehavior. Many programs also teach the use of mild forms of punishment used quickly after misbehavior occurs, for instance, taking away privileges, or if a child is on a token system, removing tokens or points from the child's bank account for misbehavior. Many programs also teach the use of mild forms of time out as ways of dealing with misconduct. All of these programs seem to have in common the fact that they try to increase the accountability of the child for their conduct to their parents by using various consequences quickly after the child's behavior has occurred. Having the child check in with the parent more frequently across the day and having the parent monitor the child's activities frequently across the day are two ways of increasing such accountability. These programs also focus on getting parents to use consequences more consistently when they are dealing with child misbehavior, whereas oftentimes parents of misbehaving children tend to respond one way at one time of day, and then in a quite different fashion the next day or at a different time of day, based upon perhaps how the parent happens to be feeling at that time. This only introduces a great deal of inconsistency into the child's life, so that the child never knows what quite to expect based upon how they're going to act. So these programs focus on making parents become more consistent in the kinds of consequences they use for particular positive and negative behaviors. And then these programs also try to make the rules much more clear, consistent, and credible in the home, so that children know what to expect from their parents and what their parents expect from them. So I encourage you to take one of these programs if it's available in your community, and if it isn't, you can read books like mine, Your Defiant Child, to learn more about these behavior management techniques. Now, as I've mentioned, once a child gets up to be 13 years of age and older, we encourage parents to include the teenager in family therapy programs so that their teen is receiving training in how to solve problems and reduce conflicts with parents, in addition to the training that the parent is receiving. One of the programs that seems to have the most success in dealing with ADHD teenagers is a program called Problem Solving and Communication Training. I have one version of this program available for parents, and you see it here. It's called Your Defiant Teen: 10 Steps to Resolving Conflict and Rebuilding Your Relationship with Your Teenager. These programs focus, first of all, on training parents in the typical behavior management methods I mentioned on the last slide. But they also involve working directly with the teenager and the parents in learning the 6 steps for solving a problem. And they encourage parents to practice this problem-solving procedure 2 to 3 times a week for at least 6 weeks, targeting various problems one at a time and using the problem-solving approach to deal with them. The problem-solving approach uses the following steps. First, Define the particular problem you're having with your teenager and write it down. Perhaps it has to do with curfew, or with homework, or with playing music too loud, or with the kinds of teenagers your child hangs around with. Define the problem, write it down. Then, the parents and teens generate multiple possible ways of addressing the problem. So, write down as many ways as you can think of that might address this particular problem. And during this process, no criticism is to be permitted. This is the creative part of problem solving. And criticism will only reduce the likelihood that you will effectively solve this problem. After you've written down as many possible options, even silly ideas, then go back and review each one of them. And each person gets to say, briefly, how they feel about that option. Do they like it or not? Then you will find after this discussion that there are one or two options that appear to be reasonably acceptable to most parties involved in the discussion. Choose one of these, circle it, and this becomes a behavior contract. Now have everybody sign the contract agreeing to use this solution for the problem for the next week. And then I also ask people to write down on the contract consequences that will occur for both the teenager and the parents if either party breaks the contract. Now, institute this contract for 1 week. That's all. Just give it a try. And then at the end of the week, you can reevaluate whether or not it's working. And if necessary, you can renegotiate the contract. Now, we also find after about 6 weeks of parents trying this program that one of the biggest obstacles to problem solving is that the parents and the teenager are using very poor styles of communication. And so we encourage parents and teenagers to adopt more positive forms of the way they talk to each other and deal with each other on a day-to-day basis. You can read more about these positive communication strategies in my book, Your Defiant Teen. A few parents and teenagers also have unreasonable beliefs about each other, or irrational beliefs. For instance, parents believe that a teenager should obey everything they tell them to do. This, of course, is not a rational idea, since even in normal families, teenagers do not always do everything their parents tell them to do. Another unreasonable belief that a teenager might have is that if they don't get their own way, their life will be ruined. For instance, if they don't get the car to use this weekend, they'll become a social pariah with their friends and won't be able to face up to them on Monday morning. This, of course, is a gross exaggeration. So whenever we encounter these kinds of irrational or unreasonable beliefs, parents should try to change them by adopting more appropriate and normal beliefs. You can find out more ways of addressing these unreasonable beliefs in my book, Your Defiant Teens. Now let's turn from these psychosocial or parenting programs over to the medications that are available for ADHD. There are at least 3 kinds of medications that have been approved by the FDA in the United States for dealing with ADHD. One type of medication is known as the stimulants. And you see here there are 2 types of stimulants on the market, one that involves the drug methylphenidate and others that involve the amphetamines. And you can see various brand names for these drugs in parentheses here. A second drug that was approved by the FDA in 2003 for ADHD children, teens, and adults is Strattera, going by the drug name atomoxetine. Atomoxetine is not a stimulant and works very differently than the stimulants, though it achieves some of the same effects as the stimulants in regulating ADHD symptoms. Finally, and most recently, the FDA approved in 2009 a drug called Intuniv, which goes under the chemical name guanfacine XR for extended release. This is an antihypertensive drug that was used previously to treat hypertension in children and adults, but it was also found to have some therapeutic benefits in reducing ADHD symptoms. And so after a number of trials with ADHD, the FDA approved it for use with ADHD as well. I'll have more to say about these various medications shortly. Let's talk about the stimulant medications first of all. The stimulants are the most well-studied drugs in psychiatry. Indeed, I would argue they're the most well-studied drugs in pediatrics as well. They have been used for more than 60 years. Millions of children and adults have been treated with these medications. Indeed, there are more than 400 scientific studies in the literature attesting to the benefits of these medications for management with ADHD, and these studies involve thousands of individuals undergoing scientific study of the benefits of these medications. And that is why we can say that these are very well-studied drugs, and we know a lot about them and how they work with ADHD children, both their benefits and their side effects. Now, there used to be 3 stimulants on the market in the United States. I've mentioned 2 of these already, methylphenidate and the amphetamines. A third drug was available for several decades, and it was known as Pellet, but it was discontinued more than a decade ago because it produced rare yet significant problems with liver complications and sometimes liver failure in children, and so it has been removed from the market. Now, research shows that between 75 and 80% of ADHD children and adolescents will respond to one of these medications that you see here, either the methylphenidate preparations or the amphetamines. If you try both types of medications and all of their different delivery systems, you may find that up to 90% of children are likely to respond to one of the medications or delivery systems in the marketplace. What's new in the marketplace? Well, actually, not so much new medications or new stimulants, but new ways of delivering the drug into the body so that it lasts longer with each dose. One of the problems that we had with the stimulants during most of the time they've been available is that the pills or the immediate release form of stimulant medications didn't last very long. Typically, their therapeutic effects lasted only about 3 to 5 hours. And so many children had to take their medication 2 to 3 times a day, often at school. And this often produced social stigma at school and difficulties with delivering the drug during the school day. And so companies decided to try to see if they could discover various ways of delivering these stimulants into the body that would allow them to last much longer than the 3 to 5 hours. And the companies came up with 4 new delivery systems known as the pump, pellets, patches, and prodrug. And I'll tell you more about these in just a moment. So we now have 5 delivery systems for getting the stimulants into the body and keeping them there. The first of these are the pills, or the immediate release form of the medications that have been around for decades. The second is the pump, which is known as Concerta, and it uses a water-based pump system. Let's take a look at the Concerta or pump delivery system. You see it here. The Concerta capsule is a capsule that looks like this, and yet at the top of the capsule is a small laser-drilled hole. In the upper 2 chambers of the capsule is a paste of methylphenidate, like Ritalin, and in the 3rd chamber down here is an empty compartment. Now, what happens is when the child swallows the capsule, there is powdered Ritalin or methylphenidate on the outside of the capsule, and that goes to work immediately. And then gradually, water begins to enter this empty chamber of the capsule, and as it enters that chamber, it puts pressure on the compartments that have the medicine in them, and that serves to push the paste out the end of the capsule, kind of like a toothpaste tube when you squeeze it. And this allows the medication to be expressed out of the capsule for about 10 to 12 hours, providing control of the child's ADHD symptoms across the day. Now, late in the afternoon, there's a second chamber in here that has a slightly stronger dose of medication in it, and that is what is being pushed out to help regulate ADHD symptoms later in the day. The reason the dose has to be smaller later in the day is that ADHD symptoms seem to get worse as the day progresses, and so more medication may need to be used to control those symptoms in the afternoon than in the morning. But basically, the Concerta pump works just like a miniature tube of toothpaste, squeezing out liquid methylphenidate for about 10 to 12 hours. The medication has the same side effects as the regular methylphenidate did, and it also has the same benefits as well. But its major benefit of this delivery system is that it keeps the medication in the body longer so that the child doesn't have to take multiple doses of the medication across the day. Here you can see exactly how the Concerta pump might work. In the old days, children had to take their methylphenidate 3 times a day in a pellet form, and you see what happens in the graph here to their blood level of this medication. The blood level would rise after they took their first pill, but then it would start to fall again after several hours, getting to a point where it wasn't able to control their behavior. So they had to take another pill. That would increase the blood level back up again so that there was some therapeutic control, but eventually within a few hours that would decline again so that the child wasn't being controlled properly. So they'd have to take a third pill in order to improve their ADHD symptoms, but even that would decline within several hours. So there was this kind of roller coaster ride of the blood level of the medication, leaving the child exposed or uncovered by their medication for certain periods of time during the day. That is to say, their disorder wasn't being well managed at these periods of time when the blood level was quite low. So let's see how Concerta improves this situation. When the child swallows the Concerta capsule, the outer coating dissolves, and that's the powdered methylphenidate, and that goes to work right away, as you see here. Within a matter of an hour or two, there is a paste that is being squeezed out of the end of the Concerta tube, and that goes to work keeping the blood level up. And it keeps it up for the rest of the day so that there are no dips in the blood level or no periods of time when the child's ADHD isn't being regulated. And then, of course, toward the end of the day, the medication wears off. So that's how the Concerta pump system works, by keeping medication in the body across the day and eliminating the need for multiple doses. Now, the third delivery system we have is the time-release pellet system. We see this system in medications like Ritalin LA for long-acting, Focalin XR for extended release, Metadate CD, which is available mainly in Europe, and Adderal XR. All of them use the time-release pellet system. Now, the pellets are contained in a capsule, as you see at the bottom of this slide. When the capsule is swallowed, it dissolves, and inside the capsule are these different beads of medication, each with different time-release coatings on them. Some of the beads dissolve immediately. Others dissolve in an hour. Others in 2, 3, 4 hours, for up to 8 to 10 hours across the day. This approach to keeping the medication in the body helps to achieve the same effect as did the Concerta pump, and you can see it in the graph up here. Instead of having to take a pill twice a day, as you see here, where the pill increases the blood level in the body and then it goes away, and then you have to take another pill and it increases the blood level, and then after that it goes away, the pellet release system actually helps to keep the medication in the body across the day, as you see in the red line here, so that it achieves the same effect as the pump system. The child has to take the medication once a day, and the medication stays in the bloodstream for most of the waking day and then decreases in the late afternoon to early evening hours. Now, one of the advantages of the pellet system is that if the child can't swallow the capsule, you can actually open the capsule, as you see here, sprinkle the pellets on food like applesauce, and the child can eat their medication that way. And it really doesn't change the effect of the medication in the body very much at all. So that's one of the advantages of this system. Now, the fourth delivery system that was invented is actually a skin patch. This is used for methylphenidate, where the individual wears a patch, it's kind of like a Band-Aid, on their shoulder or on their buttocks, and this patch contains a layer that has the medication in it, along with an adhesive that helps the patch stick to the body, and then there is a liner that protects the skin from the medication, and the medication actually moves through the holes in that liner to be absorbed by the skin. This is a very clever way of delivering the medication into the body without the need to swallow tablets, and it can keep the medication continuously in the bloodstream as long as you wear the patch. Now, one of the side effects of the stimulants is that it produces insomnia, so you have to be careful to take the patch off several hours before bedtime to allow the medication to wash out of the body. Nevertheless, this is a very useful delivery system for getting the medication into the body without having to swallow multiple pills across the day. The last delivery system was just invented about 2 years ago. This is the drug Vyvanse. The chemical name is lisdexamfetamine because it's a type of amphetamine that's been combined with another medication known as lysine, and that combination locks up the amphetamine so that it can't work. This is called a prodrug. When you take an active medication and you lock it up with another chemical so that it can't work unless it's in a particular environment where the chemical can be split away and the amphetamine can be activated, the drug won't work unless it's in that environment. So let's see how Vyvanse works. Vyvanse is a long-acting system, just like the Concerta pump and the Pellet system, although it doesn't use that technology. But it does keep the medication in the body for as long as 10 to 14 hours, so that it only has to be taken once a day, and it can be taken with or without food, or it can be dissolved in water, and it doesn't change its properties. Now, one of the benefits of this medication is the fact that it actually lasts up to 2 hours longer than some of the other long-acting delivery systems. But it still produces the same benefits as the other stimulants, and it has the same profile of side effects as the other stimulants do. Its major advantage, besides lasting longer, is that it's a lot less likely to be abused. And that's because this form of amphetamine only works if it's in the human gut or in the stomach and intestine. And that's where there's a chemical that can split away the lysine and allows the amphetamine to go to work. Amphetamines were highly abused drugs because they could be crushed and inhaled through the nose, and one could get high like cocaine from them, or they could be crushed into a powder and injected in a solution into the bloodstream, and one could also develop an addiction to the drug that way. So in this way, the amphetamine is locked up, and it can't be inhaled or injected very effectively to get high. The drug has to be swallowed, and then in the stomach and intestine there's an enzyme that splits the drug apart and leaves the amphetamine to go to work by being absorbed into the blood. It's a very clever delivery system for reducing the abuse liability of the amphetamines. All of the stimulants, regardless of their delivery system, appear to produce similar behavioral benefits for children and adults with ADHD. And you see a list of these benefits here: improving concentration, attention, and persistence, reducing impulsiveness and hyperactivity, increasing work productivity. It also seems to reduce the number of days a child is absent from school, probably because the child is more successful at school in getting their work done. There's some evidence that it may even increase reading achievement if the child stays on the medication for at least several years or longer. It also decreases the likelihood that the child may be retained in grade because the child is more successful now. We also find that the drugs in some children produce more emotional control over their impulsive emotions, and may even reduce impulsive aggression or defiant behavior. There's also evidence that the medications reduce antisocial activities or conduct problems in the community. And a few studies suggest that if children are treated with these medications into adolescence, it may lessen the likelihood that the ADHD teenager is likely to smoke or use other substances illegally. Some additional benefits from the medications are that they improve compliance to commands and following rules. They help to improve the child's memory for what they've been told to do. They also improve the child's motor coordination and handwriting. Because of all of these benefits that I've discussed, it's no wonder then that we see ADHD children often report improved self-esteem, better success at home, better success at school, having more friends, and not being punished as often as others, and so it tends to improve their self-esteem. We also find that there may be some improvement in sports performance, not so much in their athletic ability, but in their awareness of what is going on in the sports or games that they are playing, and therefore they're less likely to make mistakes because of their inattentiveness. Teenagers and adults with ADHD who drive motor vehicles often report that their driving is improved from taking these medications while they drive, and research supports those opinions. Stimulants are no exception. As you see here, most of the side effects from the stimulants are quite benign. Indeed, fewer than 5% of people tested with these medications ever stopped the medication because of their side effects. The side effects are also dose responsive, meaning that if you have problems with them, just lower the dose and the side effects typically decline or go away. If they don't, then you can switch to a different form of medication. The most common side effects seen in children and adults are the following 4. Difficulties falling asleep at night or insomnia. Loss of appetite, especially for the noontime meal, with usually a recovery of appetite later in the afternoon or evening. Some children and adults experience headaches and stomach aches, but not as much as the insomnia and loss of appetite. All of these can be dealt with by reducing the dose, and some of them can be dealt with by taking the medication with food in the morning. Less than 10% of individuals experience an increase in irritability, particularly late in the afternoon as the medication is wearing off, and a few percentage of cases have reported that it increases their sense of a proneness to crying, or, if you will, a certain sentimentality. About 10% of individuals experience an increase in nervous mannerisms, such as nail biting or skin picking. Less than 3% of them develop nervous tics. Usually these are individuals who have nervous tics or have a family history of tics or Tourette syndrome, and the medication is simply bringing out that propensity. Otherwise, the medications do not cause Tourette syndrome or tics in people who are not tic-prone or have such a family history. And stopping the medication usually results in a recovery of the tics back to their baseline frequency. Most individuals put on these medications, particularly children, do experience a failure to gain weight. They don't lose weight, they just don't grow as much as other individuals. They also find that they don't grow as quickly in their skeletal height or stature. This appears to be a temporary effect, though it may last for 1 to 3 years when an individual is taking medication. But all of the studies to date show that these effects do not last, that by adolescence, children who took these medications are no different in their weight or in their height than children who didn't take the medications, and they're no different from what we would have expected their height and weight to be from their earlier height and weight. And certainly by adulthood, there is no evidence of any growth suppression from the stimulant medications. So the effects on growth appear to be transitory. Now, if a child has significant growth problems, we do recommend that they go on drug holidays, coming off their medications for weekends and summers in order to give them a chance to grow. Most individuals, however, are not experiencing significant growth problems, and they can stay on their medications year-round. There were reports in the media that the stimulant medications might produce damage in the chromosomes inside red blood cells, and people thought this might mean that the stimulants predispose people to cancer. But further research shows that this was absolutely false, that there was no evidence of chromosomal damage from taking the medications, and therefore there was no increase in cancer risk from using these drugs. There are other side effects from the medications. You see here that there's a slight increase in heart rate, which is minor and of no significance, unless the child, of course, has significant heart problems or a family history of heart disease, and then, of course, they should receive a medical physical exam to make sure that stimulants would be appropriate for them. There's also a slight increase in blood pressure, which is minor, but it could be a problem for children who may have high blood pressure, and therefore physicians check blood pressure before prescribing these medications. About 1 to 2% of children experienced a form of hallucinations called a stimulant psychosis from taking the medication. Typically, they reported feeling things crawling on their skin, what is known as a tactile hallucination. This decreased when the medication was stopped and went away entirely after the medication came out of the bloodstream. It's a very rare side effect, but it can occur in young children, particularly at very high doses. In general, we have found, having studied these medications for more than 60 years, that there are no long-term adverse consequences from having taken these medications for years at a time in childhood. I know that you may have heard that stimulants might produce an increase in sudden death from taking the medications. These reports have turned out to be false. It is very, very unlikely that a child will experience sudden death from these medications. The risk appears to be in children who have significant cardiac problems to begin with, or who have a family history of sudden death at a young age. Even then, the evidence is not clear that even these individuals experience an increased risk of sudden death from the medications. When we look at the evidence, it appears that people who take these medications have about the same rate of sudden death as the general population, and you see that risk at the bottom of the slide here. Between 1 and 7 people out of every 100,000 people in the population may drop dead from sudden cardiac arrest at any given time. And the rate is no different in people who take stimulants. Indeed, some studies show it's even lower, and that's because people taking stimulants have already been pre-screened for cardiac problems and therefore are less likely to be on the medication if they already have those problems. Nevertheless, at this point, there does not appear to be compelling evidence that stimulants are causing sudden death. Even so, it's wise clinical practice to make sure that a child does not have a significant history of cardiac problems or sudden death in the family before placing such a child on stimulants. There are a number of misconceptions or myths that the public has about stimulant medication. Let's take a look at some of these and address them. One misconception is that the drugs are addictive. They are only addictive if they are crushed and inhaled like cocaine or injected intravenously. If they are taken in their form as normally prescribed, there is no risk of addiction from these medications. Some people have accused the stimulants of increasing aggressive or assaultive behavior. Indeed, some reports claimed that the stimulants produce the Columbine shootings, which is absolutely ridiculous. All of the evidence we have shows that when children take stimulants, it reduces their aggressive behavior and their likelihood of behaving in antisocial ways. There was some belief that taking stimulants might increase the risk of seizures, particularly in children who already had seizures or who had a low threshold for seizures. The evidence suggests that this would only occur at very, very high doses, and these are doses that are simply not available in the bottles of medication as they're prescribed. So that these medications are safe even for children who already have a seizure disorder or epilepsy. There was some indication that stimulants might increase tics or cause Tourette's syndrome. The available evidence suggests this is not the case. However, if children already have tics, about a third of them may show an increase in the frequency of their tics from these medications. Even so, a third of them show no change in their tic frequency, and 35% even report a decrease in their tics when they're on these medications. So it only appears to be a minority of children who already have tics who may experience a worsening of their tics from these medications. In that case, stop the medication and the problem should go back to its original level. And then you can switch to a different medication, perhaps one of the non-stimulants, to deal with this problem. I know it has been reported in the media that we are over-medicating children in the United States, but when studies are done, we actually find that this is patently false. Indeed, we find that only about 60% of ADHD children are taking medications, 40% of them are not on medication, and only 10% of adults with ADHD are currently taking medication. So we are not overdosing or overprescribing individuals in the U.S. with these medications, even though the medications certainly are being used a lot more often than they were 20 to 30 years ago. But so are other medications for other medical disorders. That is simply good public health and good medical practice. As we discover new and effective treatments, we're likely to see those treatments increase their use within the population. Now you see here some of the figures on prescribing rates for medication in the United States, which is why we can say that we're not overusing medications here. About 7 to 8% of children have ADHD, but only about 4% of them are currently taking medications. That's about 60% of all eligible children who have ADHD being on medication. And as I've said, the figure is much lower for adults. About 5% of adults in the United States have ADHD, and only 1 in 10 of those is currently taking medication for it. So we have no evidence that we are over-treating ADHD. If anything, we are under-treating it. Some people have said that taking stimulant medication increases the risk that a child may be a drug abuser later in life, particularly be prone to using stimulants as drugs of abuse, such as nicotine and cocaine. This has been examined in 15 different studies, and these studies find no evidence that children treated for any length of time throughout childhood or adolescence were at any greater risk for developing problems with drug abuse than were children who had not been medicated. So there is no evidence behind this claim. Now, it has often been said that while stimulants improve behavior, and may even improve productivity at school, they don't improve academic achievement as measured by academic achievement tests that children may take annually, such as tests of language, reading, spelling, math, history, and so on. In other words, the medications don't produce knowledge or an improvement in knowledge. But why would they? No pill contains knowledge. So if you take a pill, you still may not know what you didn't know yesterday. However, there have been a few studies lately that have followed children for several years, and they have found that there may be an increase in academic knowledge if a child stays on medication long enough to benefit from the medication. So that children on medication may eventually learn more in school than children who were not taking their medication. But regardless of whether there is an improvement in knowledge, the drugs do improve productivity, classroom conduct, following instructions, peer relationships, friendships, grades, reduce the amount of punishment children receive in school, reduce the days absent from school, and reduce the likelihood that the child will be retained in grade because of poor school performance. Isn't that enough? Obviously, there is great improvement in the quality of life for children who take these medications with regard to their school success, even if the drugs may or may not improve knowledge. Now, a recent drug approved in 2003 for treating ADHD in children and adults is Strattera, also known as atomoxetine. Strattera is not a stimulant, and it works quite differently in the brain than do stimulants. It works by preventing the reuptake of a chemical in the brain known as norepinephrine, or the noradrenergic system. So it works a little differently than the stimulants. For this reason, Strattera is not an abusable drug, and that is why it is called an unscheduled drug, whereas the stimulants, because they do have some abuse potential, are scheduled drugs. An unscheduled drug has a lot less restrictions on it. For instance, samples can be given by a physician for an individual to try. You don't have to have the medication renewed every month. You can get refills on your prescriptions and so forth. So Strattera is a drug with a lot less abuse potential than the stimulants. It was approved in 2003 after it had been tested in various research studies using more than 6,000 children and adults worldwide. Since 2003, more than 5 million patients have been treated with this medication, so we know a great deal about the safety of the medication and its effects and side effects. The treatment is effective for managing ADHD in kids, teens, and adults, and about 75% of the people who are placed on this medication show a positive response to the medication. Even people who did not respond to a stimulant still have a chance of responding to this medicine, as you see here. About 55% of the people who had failed a stimulant trial did respond to this medication. So it's a useful alternative to the stimulants when the stimulants haven't worked. The medication effect from Strattera has been studied for as long as 3 and now up to 5 years, and research shows that it continues to produce improvements over this period of time. Now, research does show that the medication does not produce quite the degree of improvement that the stimulants do. It produces about 60 to 70% as much improvement as the stimulant medications, but still that's pretty good, especially for most cases of ADHD. There are even some studies that have shown that the longer you stay on this medication, the more likely you are to improve from it. It's not quite sure why this would be the case, but people who stayed on the medication for several years actually had more improvement from the drug than people who had only taken it for a few weeks to a few months. What's nice about this medication is that it can be given once a day in the morning, or once a day at bedtime, or the dose can be split and taken once in the morning and once at night. Nevertheless, the medication lasts for approximately 24 hours, providing good coverage of ADHD symptoms throughout the day. Like the stimulants, Strattera produces a lot of improvements in a variety of domains of children's behavior and school performance, as you see here, not only improving symptoms of ADHD and oppositional disorder and aggression, but also improving symptoms of anxiety. The drugs, like the stimulants, also improve self-control and executive functioning, and therefore result in improvements in school behavior, productivity, peer relationships, self-esteem, parent-child relationships, and so on. Unlike the stimulants, Strattera does improve bedwetting, that is the number of dry nights, in children who have enuresis or who are bedwetters. Because the medication lasts for more than 24 hours, or up to 24 hours rather, it does appear to result in improvement in behavior the next day, even though no medication may be given the next morning. Unlike the stimulants, Strattera does not produce a side effect of insomnia. Indeed, less than 7% of children had any trouble falling asleep on this medication, compared to up to half of children who were taking stimulants like methylphenidate. And so, bedtime behavior problems do not appear to be quite as great with this medication as with the stimulants. Now, stimulants, every once in a while, have been known to produce emotional blunting, that is, a restriction of the range of emotion in ADHD children, and parents would sometimes complain of this effect. We have not seen this complaint with Strattera. Finally, like the stimulants, you can use Strattera with ADHD in cases where children may also have autistic spectrum disorders. We used to think that you couldn't use ADHD medications with children who had autistic spectrum problems, but research now shows that those individuals do respond to these medications if they have ADHD with their autistic spectrum disorder. As with the stimulants, Strattera also produces side effects, though they are somewhat different than those with the stimulants. First of all, Strattera may produce a little bit of sleepiness, drowsiness, or sedation, especially at the beginning of the drug trial, though this usually dissipates with time. Some children also reported stomach aches and headaches on the medication, and also nausea. But again, this was in a minority of the patients. There is a slight increase in blood pressure and heart rate, as there was with the stimulants, but the effect is relatively minor. Also, Strattera did produce a temporary problem with weight gain early in therapy, usually during the first year, but with no further difficulties with growth thereafter. There was a transient effect on height as well, though not as much as with the stimulants, but here again, after several years, there was no further effects of the medication evident in any parameter of growth. Now, there is one reported case of liver functioning problems with Strattera, and therefore clinicians do monitor liver functioning, but this is 1 out of 4.5 million treated cases, so it's an exceptionally rare side effect. Also, Strattera has a black box warning on the package insert, suggesting that it has the potential to increase suicidal thinking in children, not in adolescents or in adults. Many of us, however, believe that this black box warning was unsupportable, and that is because the evidence for it did not appear to suggest that Strattera, in fact, increased suicidal thinking. In the Strattera studies, about 0.3%, as you see here, 0.3% of children who were taking medication in the drug trials complained of thinking of suicide. None of the children attempted suicide. Now, to evaluate this, we have to understand what is the likelihood of suicidal thinking in ADHD children who are not taking the medication. And you see here what those rates are. 6% of children, and nearly a third of teenagers in high school with ADHD reported thinking about suicide. That is a far, far greater number than the percentage of children taking Strattera who had complained of suicide, or suicidal thinking, excuse me. So you can see why I and many other scientists do not believe that Strattera is actually associated with an increase in suicidal thinking, despite the black box warning that the FDA placed on its label. Another drug, quite different from the stimulants and from Strattera, was approved by the FDA in 2009, and this is Intuniv. Intuniv is also known as guanfacine extended release, or XR, and it works in the brain quite differently. It works by adjusting the alpha-2 receptors, primarily in the frontal lobe of the brain, and thereby increasing their ability to transmit nerve signals. Intuniv was an antihypertensive drug that was used to treat high blood pressure in individuals, but it was also known to improve symptoms of ADHD when it had been tried for that disorder. And so after a number of studies, the company manufacturing this drug was able to get approval for this medication for treating ADHD. and this approval was received approximately 2 years ago. Evidence shows that guanfacine XR does improve the symptoms of ADHD, both the inattentive and the hyperactive impulsive symptoms, and that it does so better than the other antihypertensive drugs that also caused sedation. It also is less likely to have effects on cardiac functioning, less likely to have effects on blood pressure, less likely to produce sedation and sleepiness, and therefore may be a safer form of an antihypertensive medication to use for ADHD than were the regular form of guanfacine and another hypertensive drug known as clonidine. Also, research suggests that this drug can be combined with stimulants to enhance the effect of medication control of ADHD. The drug may be most optimal for improving symptoms of inattention as well as symptoms of forgetfulness, as well as those of emotion regulation and defiant behavior. They may not be quite as effective with other aspects of ADHD symptoms. As I've mentioned, this medication, known as an alpha-2A agonist, works directly in the frontal lobe by helping to smooth out nerve signals or fine-tune nerve cells so that there is enhanced signal transmission along the nerve cell, and that is how it appears to achieve its therapeutic effect in children with ADHD. Like Strattera, this medication does not exacerbate tics or anxiety, and indeed, guanfacine has been used as a treatment for tic disorders and Tourette's syndrome. The medication can be given once daily, like Strattera, and its effects continue throughout the day into the next morning. The drug can also be given at bedtime if necessary in order to improve the onset of sleep. Like the other drugs, Intuniv has its own side effects. The most common is sedation or sleepiness, particularly during the early beginnings of the drug trial. It also appears to be mild to moderate in nature and may increase later in the day with time on the medication across the day. The medication does not appear, however, to interfere with a child's motor coordination or attention. A few children reported problems with headaches and with fatigue on the medication, as well as with sedation. Even fewer children reported problems with abdominal pain, nausea, and decreased appetite. And very rarely did the drug produce irritability, a dry cough, dry mouth, or dizziness. There was a mild decrease in blood pressure on the medication, which is not surprising given that the drug has been used to lower blood pressure in patients with hypertension. There was also a slight decrease in heart rate from the medication, but this effect was minor. Studies show that these side effects decreased over time the longer the individual was on medication, and especially after about 2 weeks. If individuals are taking the drug valproate, usually used to treat epilepsy, then certainly blood levels of their medications need to be monitored if they are also going to take guanfacine XR. And there was a warning on the package that Intuniv should not be combined with the drug Abilify. Now, I've said that ADHD runs in families and that there is an increased risk that the parent also may have ADHD. What recommendations would we give to parents who have ADHD who are trying to raise an ADHD child? Here are a few suggestions. First of all, the ADHD parent should get themselves diagnosed and treated as soon as possible so that their ADHD does not interfere with their child rearing or with providing treatment for their child's ADHD. Second, we recommend that they let the parent without ADHD handle school-related activities for the child, such as getting homework done, getting school projects done on time, interacting with school personnel, and so forth. Schoolwork is usually very time-sensitive, and since adults with ADHD have problems with time management, it's best that the non-ADHD parent handle these time-sensitive issues. I would also suggest that parents alternate who is responsible for caring for the ADHD child, and alternate supervision every other night. So, for instance, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings, the non-ADHD parent may be responsible for supervising the child, getting their homework done, getting them ready for bed, and so on. And then on alternate nights, the ADHD parent assumes the supervision. This sees to it that no parent is responsible for caring for the ADHD child continuously every night of the week after school. I would also suggest that the non-ADHD parent handle other time-sensitive household responsibilities, such as paying bills, getting to appointments, and so on, while the ADHD adult handles the non-time-sensitive chores and responsibilities. People with ADHD often have trouble controlling their emotions and are quite impulsive in expressing their emotions. Therefore, we suggest that the ADHD parent, if they are engaged in a conflict with their ADHD child and they feel as if their emotions are escalating, put themselves in a form of timeout, which is to say, remove themselves from the situation, go off to another room, attempt to calm down and regain control of their emotions before continuing the interaction with their child. Also, we would suggest that the ADHD parent review any major disciplinary decisions about the child with the non-ADHD parent before instituting them to make sure that they are not engaging in impulsive and excessive discipline and doing so unnecessarily. And finally, because ADHD can interfere with driving of a motor vehicle, we suggest that the non-ADHD parent drive the children to their activities rather than the ADHD parent, unless the ADHD parent is taking medication while driving. Obviously, we recommend this in order to reduce the risks of accidents with the children in the car should the ADHD parent be driving and not be on their medication. In conclusion, I hope that you have learned a great deal from this course. In particular, I hope that you have learned that there are numerous treatments that are available for the management of ADHD symptoms, and while they don't produce a cure for ADHD, they can result in significant control of ADHD symptoms. By controlling those symptoms, it is hoped that there should be a decrease in the degree of impairment that the individual is experiencing in many major life activities as a result of managing their ADHD symptoms. ADHD, it turns out, is one of the most treatable psychiatric disorders. It has more treatments available, particularly medications for its management. Those treatments result in improvement in more people than is the case with other psychiatric disorders. And the degree of improvement in the symptoms that is found is significantly greater than that seen for other treatments for other disorders. Our goal in treating ADHD is to improve the symptoms in order to improve the ADHD child or teenager's effectiveness, success, and overall adjustment. And in doing so, it is hoped that we have reduced the likelihood that they may experience various secondary harms from unmanaged ADHD. Thank you for taking this course. I hope that you've learned something about ADHD, its nature, and management from these courses for parents. I invite you to take other courses I have on this website at your convenience. I also hope that you will visit my publisher's website, Guilford.com, or the websites of other major booksellers, to view and learn more about some of my own trade books on ADHD and on childhood defiance that are currently published. And you see 4 of them here. My book, Taking Charge of ADHD for Parents, my latest book, Taking Charge of Adult ADHD, as well as my 2 books for dealing with defiant children and defiant teens. Thank you again for taking this course. Goodbye.